Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the stabbing death of a tech executive in San Francisco raises fresh concerns about safety in the city. We discuss the fallout with our KQED politics and government team. Plus, we talk with Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis about California's power and position in the world and our high points and struggles right here in the Golden State. Plus, the lush artistry of Kehinde Wiley is tonight's look at something beautiful. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, April 7th, 2023. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Priya David Clemens. There are no answers in the investigation into the violent death of tech entrepreneur Bob Lee. San Francisco police have yet to announce an arrest or suspected motive in the case. The tech community has expressed outrage following Lee's death and has decried a lack of public safety in San Francisco, while Mayor Breed called it a horrible tragedy. The mayor recently won $25 million to supplement the police budget to cover overtime and recruitment. The SFPD is currently understaffed by about 500 officers. Joining me now with the response are two correspondents from our KQED politics and government team, Marisa Lagos and Guy Marzorati. Thank you both for being here.
Great to be here. Priya.
So we have seen this week conservative pundits jump all over this story as an example of, more lawlessness in San Francisco. On Fox News, we saw this headline, Cities of Despair for San Francisco, and saying that even the safe areas of San Francisco are dangerous. This is not to belie the fact that we do have public safety concerns here in the city. We have a major issue with property crime. However, in terms of really violent crime, San Francisco generally doesn't crack the FBI's top 10 list. Marisa, what are your thoughts on how this is all being seen and the response from government officials here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple buckets here. Like, conservative media long before the pandemic and some of the, blowing up of homelessness and some of the bigger problems in California has long liked to sort of target San Francisco for their ire. So that's not unusual. But it's true, and to your point, it's true, any crime is horrific. This was an awful murder, and I don't think anybody wants to undercut that. But it does seem to be used by some people for political purposes to kind of drive home a point that they already wanted to make. And to your point, we see red states, Dallas, Houston, Jacksonville, Florida, Fort Worth, Texas, like all of those, if you look at murder rates in particular, those states and cities have far higher murder rates than California. In fact, in California, as the governor points out, the murder capital of the state is Kern County, one of the most conservative counties here. So this is not just a red versus blue issue, right? And I think that is the challenge for people like Mayor Breed and other elected officials who clearly want to solve this crime and want people to feel safe. You mentioned property crimes. That is an issue that really touches people deeply, because if you cannot feel safe in your home, in your car, parking your car in your city, that's a problem, right? But I do think we do a disservice when we kind of overstate the problem and try to politicize it, which people like Elon Musk sort of jumped to do. And again, we've seen Fox News and other right-wing media do for years, essentially.
Can we also say, though, District Attorney Brooke Jenkins might be feeling the Chesa Boudin treatment on this one, right? This is a case where, as you mentioned, we barely have an investigation, let alone an arrest, let alone a prosecution, which is what the DA ultimately will deal with. But still, Elon Musk has Brooke Jenkins in her
And let's be clear, the reason this is getting so much attention is because this is a wealthy tech entrepreneur, a white man. It's awful, but the hundreds of murders that happen across the nation every day are mostly ignored by people in those cities and in the national media.
Yeah. I don't know if Governor Newsom has weighed in on this. He's been out of the state for the past several days. He's making a swing through southern states as part of his step into the culture wars to take the fight to these Republican strongholds. And in fact, he just announced a $10 million PAC, which is really in place to fund those efforts. Guy, how's that trip going?
It's been a very political spring break for the Newsom family, traveling through southern states. I think in part, as you mentioned, that PAC building up relationships in those states that don't have huge democratic apparatuses to begin with, but also this ongoing contrast Newsom has with President Joe Biden on how to deal with these culture wars. You're seeing the president really take pains to avoid confrontation on these issues, focus on economics. Newsom is exactly the opposite. He's going to these states. He's taking on these fights on social issues. And, you know, people have different views on this. Some might say this is kind of a troll-a-thon. He's kind of egging on confrontation with these governors. It's almost like, when they go low, I grab my limbo stick. That's kind of how he's approaching these things. But in the same time,
he's getting coverage for it.
He's getting coverage, and a lot of Democrats want that pugilism.
Yes.
They want to have someone who's kind of taking these fights on social issues, especially because 2024, we don't know if the economy is going to be in a place where Democrats can feel comfortable to run on that. They're going to have these kind of social issue messages going into that campaign.
He also just took on a fight with the oil industry. This has been many years in the making. And so he, right before he left for his trip, had a hearing, and he actually signed bills into law saying that oil industry executives and companies are going to have to share their profit information and that the state can actually limit some of that. Is this going to work, Marisa?
I mean, it's interesting. Newsom came out in the fall swinging when oil prices were over $2 a gallon, $2.50 a gallon more than the national average in California. And he said, we're going to put a windfall profit tax on oil companies. That is not where this legislation ended up. But I actually think after doing the reporting I've done over the past 6 months and listening to these hearings where experts came forward, this might be more sort of influential in terms of oil prices long term. What we heard at some of these hearings is that for 40 years, the state has sought a lot of this information about the way these oil companies do business, specifically in California, because we do have a special blend, and most of our oil that we use is refined here in state for that reason. I think that, Newsom had to kind of take a little bit of a loss in that he backed off this tax or penalty, but they are going to create this structure that's going to give regulators far more power to get this information from oil companies, and that potentially that could, either whether it's through actions at the commission or just sort of public pressure to say, hey, why are oil prices, there's this mystery surcharge experts talk about. We don't understand why, even though, the increase in prices when you compare California to other states is far more than how much more we tax oil companies. So we're going to have to watch this roll out. The oil companies are going to fight it hard. They're going to go to work with their lobbyists trying to weaken whatever type of, power this new agency has. But I think ultimately this is a win for Newsom.
And there is some precedent here in the state, PG&E, for example, where
Absolutely.
you have to actually share that information.
Natural gas industry, electrical, a lot of these big industries that we all rely on do that. I think, the question is, did Newsom kind of hurt himself by doing what he often does, which is tweeting out this call for this tax at the time, penalty later, without really doing the legwork on the policy side to figure out if it was possible before he made that huge announcement. They got a lot of attention.
Well, we saw that again this week. We had heard earlier in the month, Newsom had tweeted out that we were going to stop doing business with Walgreens because Walgreens had said they were not going to provide the abortion pill in states where there were challenges against it, and Republican states generally. But so Newsom said, all right, California is done. We're not going to do business with Walgreens anymore. Specifically pulling one contract that was $54 million, he said, well, we found out this week, Kaiser Health News reported that actually that's not going to be the case. And Newsom is having to pull back on that. So the state also does $1.5 billion in business with Walgreens through Medicaid. Right. And there will be problems with the federal law if we try to end those contracts, problems with access for people to be able to get their medication. And I thought one of the most interesting elements here is that Newsom's spokesperson, when asked about this, said, well, tweeting isn't policy. So exactly to your point.
And it sounds like Trump, right?
Totally, but it ties into what you're talking about with these oil prices, too. For us covering Newsom every day and following this, these look like losses, right? He sets out these lofty goals, often on Twitter, and then ultimately what comes out in policy is either some kind of compromise, as it was with the oil legislation, or in this case, just the fact that he says we're not doing business with Walgreens is not going to happen. That, he's going to fall short of that. But it leaves open the question of what is the public getting from this? Maybe what they're getting is seeing someone who's saying, I'm fighting the oil companies, seeing someone who's saying, I'm going after and protecting reproductive rights, taking on corporations in the meantime. That might be the calculation.
And he has a history of coming out swinging, right? In 2004, he was having gay marriage happen at City Hall.
Right. And I think with Newsom, it's the opposite of Trump. We kind of understate how much rhetoric can matter. Oil prices did drop after he made those statements in the fall. And Walgreens, I believe, has backed off of some of its threats to stop selling these, at least in states where abortion is still legal. So I still think Newsom's got a little egg on his face, but it might be that the actual outcome is what he wanted to happen.
Is worth it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest pieces of national news this week, obviously, was that Donald Trump was indicted. And so we've been watching that and following that. Marisa, I'm curious about Kevin McCarthy, our new House Speaker. It's still getting used to knowing that we have a different Californian in that office. His response here.
Yeah. So we can see this tweet up on the screen, really him going after the district attorney in Manhattan who's brought this case, essentially saying that he's interfering in the democratic process. I mean, really, McCarthy's response lines up with what we've seen from Republicans across the board, even some of Trump's, potential challengers in 2024. And they, McCarthy and Republicans in Congress are threatening to investigate Bragg himself, this DA. I don't know really what for or how well that's going to go. What we've seen in the past when they've tried to go after the Justice Department and the FBI is they've basically said, we're in the middle of active investigations. We're not giving you any information. I assume that's what he would do as well. But clearly, Republicans want this to be a political conversation. They want this to be about the politics of a Democrat prosecuting the former president, not about the substance of these charges or the myriad of other charges that Trump could face even before the 2024 election.
You all have been doing some reporting as well up in Shasta County about Dominion voting systems. And that county has said, here in California, has said, we're going to chuck the system altogether and maybe go to a hand count?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking, how does the election lies, promulgated by Trump, other Republicans, how does that actually affect democracy here in California? Here you go. Yeah. This is a case of a county months ago dumping this Dominion voting system over conspiracies and now potentially moving ahead with a hand count of ballots. No other county in California does this. This is a small county, and you have election officials there saying, how is that process going to work? How is the background checks for people who would be ultimately handling ballot by ballot? We don't even have the staff to do this. There's so many open questions for that county going forward with, an election coming up next year, all going back to these conspiracies that led them to make this change.
There is one more story I want to turn to here before I let you go. This is in San Jose. There's a story that's basically ripped from the headlines here, it looks like. There's a police union official who's been accused of being involved in a drug smuggling ring, particularly with fentanyl. And for years, Guy, San Jose is your beat down there. What are you hearing about this? I
mean, I think right now we're hearing the police union today, Friday, moving ahead and terminating Joanne Segovia, the person who's being accused of this fentanyl ring, basically. But and they're doing an internal investigation, trying to find out, what can we do? Maybe set up some email filters, because she was literally using office computers and the office to smuggle these drugs. Other people are saying, okay, that's not enough. We heard from police reform advocates saying, the city should step in here and maybe break ties with negotiating with the POA, that this kind of puts a stain on the whole organization. Yeah. And it does raise a lot of questions, especially as you mentioned, fentanyl, the damage it's inflicted on communities. To have someone in the police union office doing this in the physical office is mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. Wow. All right, well, definitely a story to watch in San Jose. Breaking Bad San Jose. Guy Marzorati, Marisa Lagos, thank you both for being here.
Thanks so much.
This week, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen visited California. America's ties to Taiwan are complicated. China claims Taiwan as its own. The U.S. acknowledges the claim, but does not recognize it. President Tsai met with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and several other government officials, including California's Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Now in her second term in the position, Kounalakis also serves as California's International Affairs and Trade Development Representative. Joining me now is Eleni Kounalakis, who is serving this week as acting governor, as Governor Newsom is out of the state. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Priya. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for being here. So tell us about the meeting this week and your work broadly as a representative of California to the world at large.
Well, Priya, it's great to be able to talk about this because I think it's important for Californians to know that our state government is very engaged in what's going on in the world, and that the California brand means a lot to a lot of people. And so for us to elevate our profile on the world stage, whether it's on combating climate change, where we have a lot to say, or by welcoming the president of Taiwan to California, being there on behalf of our state and talking about what we're doing and what we stand for, it's really important.
And when you talk about a brand, let's expand on that, because we're not just talking about a marketing term here. California has incredible economic power. If we were our own country, we would be the fourth largest economy in the world. How are we using that power in the world to move forward Californian ideals?
Well, it really is remarkable. And I think that it's pretty clear that what we're doing on trying to invest in transitioning to a carbon-free energy future, clean energy, whether it's our electric vehicle mandates, whether it's changing our grid, the development of Lithium Valley down in the Salton Sea, investing in hydrogen power, cleaning our ports. All of this really puts us in a place where we're leading in the world. That's a very important part of it. But it's also the fact that, our motto is all dreams welcome. This is what our tourism industry really promotes in the world. And it's true, because whether it's entrepreneurs coming here to start a company or seek venture capital funding, where California distributes 2 to 1 of the next highest state for venture capital funding, or whether it's people coming for tourism or coming to work as a seasonal worker. There is opportunity here, but there is also this feeling that you're welcome in this state. And that means a lot in a world right now where so many countries, people are feeling that they may not be welcome, or the kind of person they are, or their choices in life.
Where would you say, from your position, looking out on the state as, the number 2 elected official in this state, where would you say that California is on the right track? We are doing the things we are supposed to do, and we're prospering.
Well, you mentioned the size of our economy. California went into COVID-19 the 5th largest economy in the world, and it appears as though we are poised to overtake Germany as the 4th largest economy in the world if we were a country. This is extraordinary. We know that our commitment to combating climate change, our incredible ecosystem for entrepreneurship and innovation, our extensive investments in public higher education, the fact that we're number 1 for patents in the country, that our University of California system with all of the NIH funding that goes into our universities, all of this creates an ecosystem for growth and advancement. But what we also know is that it's a very expensive state to live in. Our cost of living is high, and that drives very significant income inequality. And so our efforts as well are to use the power of our economic strength to make sure that we're looking after our communities and that people can afford to put a roof over their family's head and food on the table. And that's increasingly difficult in a state where our cost of housing is much higher than anywhere else in the country. So I would say that is really our biggest challenge, and it's one that drives the other challenges that we see, whether it's homelessness or the many other issues that are more, I think, top of mind for people.
And one of those right now is crime. We just saw, unfortunately, violent crime happen in San Francisco with the death of a tech executive. And that is something that comes up regularly. Homelessness and crime are often brought up together as twin problems within the major cities in California. What are your concerns about safety, let's say right here in San Francisco?
Well, there's been a real awakening about policing in the last couple of years since the murder of George Floyd, and California is very much at the forefront at looking at police reform, and I think that Californians support that. At the same time, you can't have democracy if you don't have rule of law. And you can't have rule of law if you can't enforce those laws. And right now, our police forces are struggling. There are fewer and fewer people who are willing to go into doing that dangerous and difficult work. And there needs to be, I think, a more comprehensive understanding of how do we make sure that while we pursue our values, and we do have clear values that what happened to George Floyd is not acceptable, that we recognize that there are institutionalized ways that we have been dealing with crime that are not necessarily in our best interest or consistent with our values. At the same time, as we make those reforms, we need to make sure that it is safe for people to walk on our streets, for businesses to be able to operate. And I think that there's an adjustment that we're going through right now.
When you look out at the landscape of California, what is top of your agenda to work on?
Well, there's so much, and we've touched upon some of those things. Again, whether it's dealing with the outcome of income inequality, making sure that our economy can continue to thrive. But I will
just
say,
to clarify, I'm thinking about policy here.
I spend a lot of time on public higher education. Very often we have this idea that we can fund our way out of our challenges. We actually have to train our way forward. We have to make sure that we have enough nurses, that we have enough people in law enforcement, we have enough first responders, enough firefighters, enough people who can build the future, and making sure that people have the opportunity to get that training is really important. We have 2.5 million students enrolled just in public higher education in the state, between our community college system, our CSU, and our UC. About 40% of the undergrads, Priya, are the first in their family to go to college, which is incredible. It's this great conveyor belt of talent. But as we build that workforce of the future, it's really for all aspects of our economy, from the service economy all the way up to our doctors and our researchers. But we have a lot of work to make sure that those opportunities are there, so that truly we are going to be able to go into the future with the workforce needed to be able to get us where we want to go.
And you are on the Board of Regents for the UC, and you're also with the CSU as a member of their Board of Trustees. Next week, you're going to be in Southern California talking specifically about education and students' needs.
Well, a big part of what we know is that the cost of going to college is also driven by housing and basic needs when you're at school. It's not just tuition. So we are working very hard, and Governor Newsom and the legislature have funded now billions of dollars in order to be able to meet basic needs, and a big part of that is housing. So there's a grant program to build more housing on our college campuses, and I'll be going to UC Irvine, where there's a project that's underway, as well as to a community college and right here in San Francisco, at San Francisco State, a ribbon cutting on a new housing dormitory there as well. So highlighting the fact that we're working hard to bring more housing opportunities to our college campus, to bring down the cost of going to college, is a big part of what we're doing just in the next few days.
The state also announced recently that it's working to bring down the cost of medicines in terms of producing our own insulin for people, our own insulin drugs. Tell us about that effort and other efforts in that arena.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that California has taken this on. We're the largest consumer market in the country, and we have the power to do creative things like this. Insulin is a very important medicine to a lot of Californians, and the fact that it costs so much is really not acceptable. And so the state of California is launching into this effort. We're going to produce insulin so that we can provide it to Californians at a far more reasonable price than they've been getting it. And these are the kinds of things, again, that we can do with a powerful economy, a lot of creativity, and a state that is willing and able to address these issues ourselves at the state level.
Turning to national news, I think there was certainly a lot of joy for Democrats this week when they saw that President Trump had been indicted. What about you? Did you pour a glass of champagne?
I don't think that it's something to be gleeful about, Priya, but I will tell you that, we were talking about rule of law. There has to be consequences for breaking the law. And that is what is happening. But I like to think that right now we have a president, President Biden, and a vice president, our very own Kamala Harris, who are working hard to lead the country. I think most Americans really want to see government deliver. And at the federal level, there is a lot of work to do. But of course, we also have major challenges in the international space. I'm a former United States ambassador. There's a war going on in Europe. There are tensions with China. It came into focus with the visit of President Tsai. We have a lot of work to do, and I think most Americans really just want to see elected officials doing their job, solving problems so that they can get up every day, go to work, live their lives, take care of their families, and enjoy all that our country and that our state has to offer.
Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Priya.
The work of globally renowned artist Kehinde Wiley is on display at San Francisco's DeYoung Museum. Wiley is well known for many pieces, including the official White House portrait of former President Barack Obama. His new exhibit is titled The Archaeology of Silence. The artwork is described by the museum as transforming the senseless deaths of black men and women around the world into a powerful elegy of resistance. Kehinde Wiley's artistry is this week's look at something beautiful. This powerful exhibit will run through October. That is the end of our show for tonight. We're off next week, but join us the following week for our special Earth Day show. If you'd like to share your comments or questions, you can email us at knr@kqed.org. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Priya D. Clemens. Thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend.